What's up, football fans? Welcome to another episode of The Extra Point. I am your host, Phil Ruskin. We have a one quarterback full PPR redraft mock draft coming up tonight. And we are going to go ahead and dive in just a couple minutes, waiting on one or two guys to show up. So we're just going to give it another couple minutes to jump in. Don't have any co-hosts tonight, just me. So this will be fun. I haven't done one of these by myself, solo cast, in a while, but always good to practice. I think we've got enough green lights. We can probably go ahead and get ready. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in, share the screen here. Hopefully this doesn't freeze up too much. And we're going to rock and roll here. So Zach on the clock. Again, one quarterback, full PPR mock draft tonight, going two running backs, three wide receivers, one tight end, two flex, and six bench for a total of 15. So if you're watching the show, you can see the screen. And we've got 30 seconds on the clock for everybody. What I'm looking for is just an opportunity to kind of see how the board, pans out. I know some leagues are a little bit different where you get an opportunity to pick your draft spot. Maybe there's, a horse race, a contest of some sort. Maybe it's based off last year's standings. But there's always an element of chance when you don't know where you're actually going to be drafting from, which is why we do these mock drafts. So you can see tonight, 12-team league. I'm drafting from the 10 spot. My preferred draft spot is obviously near one of the turns. I don't want to get stuck in the middle. So I'm really looking to draft if I have the opportunity to pick my draft spot. Ideally, I'd like to draft inside the top 6 to guarantee myself, maybe the top 7 to guarantee myself one of the big-time wide receivers, or I'd like to draft closer to the turn. I don't think there's really any bad picks in the first round. There's certainly no bad spots. But as the board starts to take some shape here, we will go ahead and see how guys' builds are starting to look, and I'll obviously give my thoughts on builds that I like, maybe some builds that aren't my favorite. But if you're watching the show, jump in the comments. Since I don't have a co-host tonight, I'd love to interact with the comments, and obviously the guys that are in the draft, I'd love to know your thoughts on your builds as well as some other guys as well. And I am about to be on the clock here. Christian McCaffrey going off at the 101 here today. I'm not concerned with the calf injury. It's not great for obvious reasons, but I also just not. It's a month away till week 1, so I'm just not super stressed over that. If it gets another 2 weeks and we still don't have positive news on McCaffrey, then maybe that drops him. CeeDee Lamb obviously not reporting to camp. Jamar Chase at the 103 not reporting yet as they're kind of hold-ins. Again, not concerned with either of those players missing time or missing any sort of significant action week 1. Tyreek Hill at the 104, Bijan 105, Amon-Ra 106, and Breece Hall at the 107. So pretty chalky to begin the first round. I had a question, actually. Somebody DM'd me today and said, what would you do with Justin Jefferson? Would you draft him ahead of players like Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, or would you drop him down? To me, it's Justin Jefferson. I'm always going to bet on the talent. Look, Davante Adams was the wide receiver 8 last year. He was number 2 overall in targets, and his quarterbacks were atrocious. So if you're telling me that you have the opportunity, I expect Jefferson to kind of finish in that range. That's why I picked Davante Adams as my comp there. I think that Sam Darnold is going to start the season. J.J. McCarthy will be the next guy up when and if he is ready. But it's Justin Jefferson, so they're going to pepper him with targets. Jordan Addison, we know today, was – I don't know if he's scheduled to appear or what's going to happen, but was actually charged with misdemeanor DUI. So I have a hard time thinking the league's going to suspend him for that, given what the league does and doesn't suspend people for. But at the – oh, no, crypto not going auto. Oh, bummer. But at the end of the day, I just don't see a world where Justin Jefferson doesn't get as many targets as they can possibly give him. And again, I'm always going to bet on the talent. So I don't normally do this, but I'm going to talk through my process a little bit here. I've got about 20 seconds. I started with Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm at the 110, so I did miss out on what I consider the tier break at the wide receiver position. So I'm not really looking to start running back. But I am going to take a flyer and take a chance here. I just talked about Davante, but the quarterback play is poor. So I'm going to take a shot on Marvin Harrison Jr. as my wide receiver 1. I would much prefer a rookie and somebody like that to be my wide receiver 2. So if I were maybe in, Kryptonaut's spot or maybe pack and cheese here, started running back, I might have tried to go receiver, maybe Puka and Marv at the turn there. But I'm still okay taking the shot on someone who is the one in his own offense. As a Niners fan, it hurts me to say this, but I really like what the Cardinals did this offseason. From a dynasty perspective, obviously, we're all extremely high on Marvin Harrison Jr., but I'm really, really high on Trey Benson as well. I think even if he's not a massive factor in fantasy this season, and I do think he'll be a factor this season, but not a massive factor. I do think that he's going to help contribute, take some of the workload off of James Conner, and just make the Cardinals a more explosive offense with Marv. I think that's going to be obviously a good matchup on the outside. He should win a lot on the outside. And I think for me, it's really important because Marv is there to look at those running backs, to look at a healthy Kyler Murray and a player like Trey McBride. So I think Arizona is one of those teams where if you grab one or two pieces, if you grab Kyler with Marv, if you grab Kyler with Trey McBride, I think you're going to be really happy in your redraft formats. And obviously, if you're fortunate enough to have that in your dynasty leagues, then it should be a really good season. So question coming in here in the chat from Mitchell Rose. Hey, with Lamb not signing, at what point would you start to worry about him? It's a good question. I'll be honest, I'm really not concerned until about 2 weeks out. And that's simply because of practice reps and fitness. And I'm going to use my comp of it's a different position, but Josh Jacobs last year started really slow, didn't have any preseason because he was holding out for a contract, showed up week 1. It was not a great season for him. The Raiders obviously were not a great team. Now, CeeDee Lamb is a ceiling guy, has the opportunity to be the overall wide receiver 1, has the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 again. So I'm not overly concerned. I just would feel better if he was there getting reps, and not reps in the sense of like getting to know Dak and the offense. Probably a pretty similar install to what they had last year. But I just want him there for football fitness because I think that's going to be really important going forward, and for injury prevention because he's the only guy, right? Like Brandon Cooks, sure, he's there, but I think Jake Ferguson is the wide receiver 2 in that offense, given that he's a tight end. But yeah, I'm not overly concerned with CD or Jamar Chase not being there until it's probably within 7 to 10 days. So that kind of almost 2-week period. So, yep, guys, if you're watching the show, jump in the comments. We're into the 3rd round now here. So Zach's back, starting with Christian McCaffrey at the 101 to pair with Brandon Ayuk, who is, as of today, a 49er, but maybe not for much longer. And DJ Moore. So I like that stack with Ayuk and DJ Moore. DJ Moore coming off of his first ever wide receiver 1 season. Mr. Freeman right now is a man after my own heart. Receiver, starting with CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, and Debo. So obviously an alpha in CeeDee, but probably the wide receiver 1 with Nico Collins and probably the wide receiver 1 in Debo Samuel. I mean, we all expect Ayuk's going to be traded. So 3 guys that should be the alphas within their own teams as your wide receivers 1, 2, and 3. My buddy Mike here at the 103, starting with Jamar Chase, adding Mike Evans, and then Derrick Henry. I'm big on Mike Evans again this season. I wasn't last year because of Baker. I've never been a Baker truther. Last year was the first time Baker Mayfield has ever finished as a quarterback 1 in his career. I'm going to let you all hold that thought because I'm about to be on the clock here. What do I want to do? Gibbs, Harrison. There's a couple guys I like here. But also looking at Mike Evans, I do think he might be quarterback proof. If he can get it done with Baker Mayfield, and that's a massive downgrade, obviously, from Tom Brady, then I do think that he can have another 1,000-yard season. And then Mike adding Derrick Henry. I'm on the clock again. I don't normally do this, but I'm going to talk through my process. I am looking at wide receiver here to go with Marv. I'm probably going to look at Jalen Waddle or Michael Pittman here. And I think for me, it's Waddle, even though he's the wide receiver 2 and Pittman's the wide receiver 1. I just like the upside of that offense. I think there's more explosive plays there. We've seen him be a wide receiver 1, even next to Tyreek. So happy with Marvin Harrison and Jalen Waddle. Again, it's a redraft. I'm looking for, best season outcomes, highest season outcomes possible versus, a dynasty team where I'm looking for, upside, longevity, contract situation. There's just a lot more factors. So as we get to the turn here, Rose Mitchell at the 104, starting with Tyreek Hill. He's on auto, quick picks. I do think Tyreek Hill can be the overall wide receiver 1 this season. I think he will be, after being the wide receiver 2 last year. Travis Etienne here for Rose Mitchell as his starting running back there for Jacksonville. I'll come back on that in just a second. And Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams is really interesting to me because I just don't fully believe that he is going to be the wide receiver one for Las Vegas the whole season. Um, I know there's rumors about him going to the Jets. Sure, that's a possibility. I could see the Bills making a trade for him if they're in contention for the playoffs, and we do think that they will be. I could see, one or two other teams maybe making a play for him, depending on where they're at in playoff contention. I think it's a far cry to think that he could go to the 49ers or go to the Chiefs. But I do think the Jets are in play. I think the Bills are in play. And those are two of the teams. I think it's possible he gets traded at some point this season. So we'll see. But coming back for Rose Mitchell's running back, Travis Etienne, um, he's really the only player in Jacksonville that I want. I'm not excited about the Jaguars this year. I've been very off of Trevor Lawrence for the last two seasons, and I'm going to be totally honest. I'm very off of him this season. I think losing Calvin Ridley and replacing Calvin Ridley with Gabe Davis, in my opinion, is a massive downgrade. Even with Calvin Ridley's age, again, this is redraft. This is not dynasty. And so to me, I'm not buying the Travis Etienne decrease in workload. I know Doug Peterson historically has liked to have a committee running back room. He wants to, share the workload, doesn't want one guy getting overloaded. I get all that. I don't think they have someone that's capable of replacing what Etienne gives them. So if you're targeting a guy in Jacksonville, Etienne is the player for me to target. Now, if it's best ball and you want to throw Gabe Davis on with Trevor Lawrence as your, QB3 stack late, sure, go ahead. At the 105, Vanilla Killa, as we get to the fourth round here, starting running back heavy, Bijan Robinson with Devon Achane, then basically going with almost a third hybridized running back with Josh Allen to stack with Dalton Kincaid. So 315 vacated targets from the Steph Diggs and Gabe Davis chart pie, however you want to call it. So I think Dalton Kincaid and James Cook are going to inherit a lot of those targets. Everyone's excited, especially in Dynasty, about Keon Coleman. I like Curtis Samuel. I like Khalil Shakir. I think both could be good players this season. But for my money, you can get them so late. I want to take the shot like Vanilla Killa did here, with that Allen Kincaid stack. It is a 3 wide receiver league, so we'll see what his team ends up looking like with the heavy running back, and then obviously the 2 onesies back to back. But I like the pieces there. Adding T Higgins, that's a really solid wide receiver 2 as your wide receiver 1. So nice pieces to begin. And as we keep going through the draft here, Shred Gross at the 106, starting his wide receiver room with Amon-Ra, Chris Olave, and Tank Dell, pairing Isaiah Pacheco with Kenneth Walker. I'm a writer for Dynasty Pros, so check out some of my written content, dynastyprosfootball.com. But I wrote an article about 6-7 months, right after the Super Bowl, so however long ago that was, in February, prior to free agency, where I said Isaiah Pacheco was a buy now candidate. I actually had him as a buy now candidate last year in Dynasty, but he's a massive buy because he was cheaper, but a massive buy now candidate. I don't think he's a lock for an RB1 season, but I do think that's where he's trending. So to get Isaiah Pacheco as your RB1, I'm very comfortable with that. To get him as my RB2, I'm even more excited by that. So we'll see, as you get into your real drafts, he's going in about this third, maybe fourth rounds, and you can see going in the third round here, and that's pretty close to ADP. So come back with some of the other teams in just a second. I'm on the clock. I have Jahmyr Gibbs as my running back 1, Marvin Harrison, Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman. I was hoping that the board would fall where Anthony Richardson got back, but he went all the way at the turn. So I'm actually going to go ahead and look and see what running backs are here. Nobody I really like. So I'm going to add another wide receiver here. I'm going to add Rashee Rice. And I'll come in when I get to my team, talk about it in a little bit. So Rafi 69 bomb, 5 rounds in, going with an anchor RB build with Breece Hall. Breece Hall is with Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, and Jahmyr Gibbs and JT as the what I would consider big 5, and 5 guys that I think realistically have a shot to be the overall RB1. So great start there with an anchor RB. Continuing down his team, Drake London, Cooper Kupp, and Rome Odunze. Drake London, I'm going to talk about in just a second, but Cooper Kupp to me is a phenomenal pick. I think it's a huge win to grab a player like that. Ultimately, I get it. Everybody's in on Puka. It's really exciting, but I really just sorry, I'm going to jump in here. He will never get back to me. So, Mr. Murray, you have made the team. Nice Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison stack. Cooper Kupp to me is a player that I'm actually targeting. If I can get him in the third round, even in the fourth would be better, but I don't think that'll happen. I think it's going to be a really good season for the Rams. And I say that for two reasons. Number one, their defense is awful. So I do think from a fantasy perspective, they have what we want. They've got two really, really solid wide receivers. They've got a running back that we love that finished as an RB1 last year. Everyone is sleeping on Matt Stafford. You can get him for free. And what's interesting is the inverse correlation where you have Cooper Kupp going in the third round, Puka going at the 1-2 turn. But Matt Stafford this is only a 15-round draft tonight. He probably won't be drafted tonight unless somebody takes him as his quarterback too. And to me, that doesn't make sense. Why do you have two receivers that you're projecting to finish basically inside the top 15, top 20, but a quarterback that you're projecting to finish outside of the top 20? So it just doesn't add up mathematically to me. I get it. There's a ton of higher ceiling quarterbacks. Obviously, I don't want Matt Stafford as my QB1. Nobody does. You want Josh Allen, Anthony Richardson. You get the guys that you can see on the board, the ceiling performance guys. But I really like Cooper Kupp this year. I think last year, obviously, is similar to Jalen Waddle, coming into the season with the calf. If my memory's right, it was the calf strain, but whatever he had, that was either hamstring or the calf that kept him out the first 3 to 4 weeks. Puka took off like a rocket ship. So Cooper Kupp, great pick. Drake London to me is still a solid pick. I'm not comfortable with Drake London or Chris Olave as my wide receiver 1. We've never seen a wide receiver 1 season out of them. I get it, the hype, Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins is 38 years old coming off of a major Achilles injury. And there are other mouths to feed in Atlanta. So I would rather see Drake London as my wide receiver 2. There's nothing wrong with Ralphie's build because he's got Kupp London. So to me, that could be an inverse. Kupp is your wide receiver 1. But just keep that in mind. Like the hype is so, I will say this, overblown that it can be challenging. You can get caught up in ADP fever of, I got to get Drake London. He's going to be Drake London to the moon is a real thing, but we haven't seen it yet. So just make sure you're tempering those expectations. Mark Andrews is my, continuing down Ralphie's team, Mark Andrews is my pick to be the tight end 1. I think that's something that he can return to. Rome Odunze, if you're watching Hard Knocks, he hasn't been featured on the first episode yet, other than just a couple mentions. I'm excited when they do a profile interview for him. He was a guy that I was massively targeting in Dynasty. And James Conner. James Conner is the RB1 in Arizona still, regardless of the age. Again, this is a redraft setting. So even though Trey Benson is the new hotness, and I do think Trey Benson is going to be a fantastic piece this season, but James Conner is still the starting running back there until he misses time. So Ralphie jumping in the chat here saying, so Nico over London. It's a good question. It's hard. The answer is yes. I think it's yes, but I say that simply because I like Stroud. I think Nico is going to be the one in that offense, just like Drake London is the one in his offense. So you can make the argument, well, London is the clear one, whereas there's 3 receivers with Tank, Diggs, and Nico to feed. I think Nico earned targets last year. He will earn targets again this season. I just think Houston is going to be a better team than Atlanta, ultimately. They've got a second-year head coach. They've got, the same guys coming back, whereas Atlanta is new head coach, new scheme, new offensive coordinator. There's a lot of new pieces there. So we're excited for it, but I think it's pretty close. But, yeah, I would take Nico over London if it were me. But again, it's not a bad pick. It's not like you're reaching for Malachi Corley in the second round and taking that guy over, Nico. Even though there's nothing wrong with Malachi Corley. As we get into the 7th round here, the man in the shed at the 108, starting with Justin Jefferson, Sam Laporta at the 205. Make sure you tune in to tomorrow's show. Tomorrow's show, as you guys know, I do a live show every Thursday night for my actual podcast, The Extra Point podcast video cast. Spoiler alert, Sam Laporta will be featured on tomorrow's show. So more information, more thoughts, takes coming on Laporta. Malik Neighbors, Lamar Jackson, Keenan Allen, and Alvin Kamara. So starting with Jefferson, Neighbors, and Keenan in his 3 wide receiver spots to solidify Lamar Jackson and Sam Laporta in the onesies, and then taking Alvin Kamara as his RB1. Curious to see what he does here at the 708. Ryan Ramczyk is out for the season. So to me, that's a big challenge for New Orleans in general. Derek Carr is still Derek Carr. Alvin Kamara didn't surpass 700 rushing yards last year. He's never really been a 1,000-yard rushing guy. That's just not his skill set. His skill set is in the passing game. But I have a lot of questions about New Orleans this season. They didn't look great last year. I don't know what kind of ceiling there is again this year. And to be honest, Ryan Ramczyk is a player that when you lose a guy like that, it's difficult to replace. So again, this is why we draft. This is why we mock draft. It doesn't mean my takes are right and everyone else's is wrong. It's just I'm not super excited about New Orleans losing a player like that. So I'm back on the clock here. I only have one running back. It is probably about time I go take a look at a second here. And I really don't like what I see, but we'll go ahead and take Raheem Mostert, still the starter in Miami, even though Achane is the projected, higher value pick. But Mostert, just like James Conner, is still the starter. So we'll see what happens with Miami's backfield. We'll talk about them as we get closer to the season because there are 3 mouths to feed in that backfield as well. So Arky, as we get into Arky Hog 21's team at the 109, I'm trying to see where interesting. Okay, so he started with A.J. Brown, came back with Saquon Barkley, and then opted for Patrick Mahomes, which, of course, anytime you take Patrick Mahomes is never a bad pick. But just interesting that he could have gone with the Super Eagles stack, chose not to. Not a huge challenge. I'm going to go ahead and do a tight end. Sorry, I'm back on the clock here. This is why I like to have a co-host, so I can have somebody take over while I do this. This is why we mock. Sorry. So it took Patrick Mahomes here, Arky Hog. Could have gone with the Super Eagle stack. It's not best ball. It is redraft. But, if you're going to take a quarterback there, why not take the super stack with your running back and your wide receiver? So Trey McBride, who I love this season as kind of the de facto wide receiver too, although I do think Michael Wilson will factor in more than people are giving him credit for this year. James Cook, who I talked a little bit about earlier, obviously being one of the players I think gets a big uptick from the trade away of Steph Diggs with Dalton Kincaid, Chris Godwin, Najee Harris, and Keon Coleman. So solid group for Arky to start. Pretty balanced, 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and then obviously someone who is certainly capable of being the overall QB1. Pack and cheese as we get into his group here at the 111, starting running back. And I was curious to see what it would look like with JT and Kyron Williams as his first 2 picks. But I like his wide receiver room. Devonta Smith, obviously, is a player we've seen in an offense with A.J. Brown, supported by Jalen Hurts, be a wide receiver 1 as the wide receiver 2. So I'm totally fine with that. DK Metcalf is going to do what DK Metcalf always does. He's probably going to finish around wide receiver 14 to 18. If he has an outlier touchdown season, he will be a wide receiver 1. The big question for DK will be what is, the play of Geno? And what does that look like ultimately over the course of the season? And then the last piece, obviously, for that, caveat I should say for that is what's this new offense going to look like? Everything that I've read in the camp reports is that DK is picking it up really quick. They're featuring him. They're throwing more than Pete Carroll historically did. So I think DK Metcalf is certainly a player we're not sleeping on, but certainly someone that is probably one of the better picks in that wide receiver 2 range to make a jump and finish inside the top 12. Joe Mixon dealing with a bit of a knock right now, but supposedly his rehab's going well. I'm not buying the Dameon Pierce hype. I'll be honest, I couldn't tell you who the running back 3 is there right now. I probably know, but I've just lost it off the top of my head. So to me, it is still Joe Mixon's backfield. Jaden Reed is a good pick. I struggle a little bit with Jaden Reed in redraft simply because you just don't know when it's going to be his week because there's so many guys in the Packers team. Christian Watson dealing with a knee injury today, downplaying it, saying he's fine. Sorry, but anytime there's an injury with Christian Watson, it raises alarm bells, and it should. So I think Jaden Reed is the one in that offense. If Christian Watson, can actually be healthy, I think he's kind of the 1A, and Reed is the 1B, but Reed to me is the safer bet. Reed, any of the Packers other than Jordan Love, phenomenal best ball picks because you don't have to worry about sit-start decisions. But in redraft, I think if you're going to take a shot, Jaden Reed is the one to take the shot on. Joe Burrow, who I think is one of the highest value players you can see in the 7th round here as a pocket passer. Dak going late today as well. I think if you miss out, Stroud usually goes in the 5th, so interesting to see him go in the 6th. But I think if you miss out on the rushing quarterbacks early, getting Joe Burrow is a very, very safe pick. to get yourself a QB1 season. And then Jonathan Brooks, we finally have a timeline, or at least what we think is a timeline, where he's going to be apparently ready week 3, week 4. Please temper your expectations. He's a rookie. He's coming into the NFL 3 to 4 weeks after the season has started. He's going to be great. It's going to take him some time. So I love that Pax got him as his 4th running back. To me, that's perfect. Let him sit on the bench for a couple weeks, and you really don't need him with JT, Kyron, and Mixon until bye weeks start popping up, and he should be ready to go at that point as well. I am back on. Oh no, I'm not quite back on the clock. I'm 2 picks or 1 pick away. I don't have a tight end. Historically, I'm a pretty late tight end drafter, but Dallas Goedert, Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet are on the board. There's one tight end behind me with Kelsey. There's not a tight end with Pax. So I could get shut out here with 2 guys, but I'm not going to take a tight end right here. I'm not super excited about the guys on the board. I am going to take another running back. It's not my favorite pick, but I do think he's the best player in the best situation of guys that are left. So Javonte Williams. I'm okay with Javonte as my running back 4. Again, not super excited about it. This was a randomized draft. The 110 it's a challenging place to draft from. So I don't love, other than Gibbs, my running back room. But it's not really about my team tonight. So we'll talk about some of the other guys' teams as well. My tight end pick, laying off the tight end pick paid off. DeAndre Hopkins going after me, Jordan Love, and Austin Eckler. Interesting, Austin Eckler. I think probably a lot of people that are sharp, if you're in this draft, if you're watching this, you're sharp. I think a lot of people expected Eckler and Robinson to be kind of co-starters, or to have, Eckler to have more relevance than people really wanted him to, especially, B-Rob managers. They were listed as co-starters today. So that could be some camp speak. It could just be, gamesmanship. But to me, oh man, these tight ends are garbage. Goddard, Schultz, Kmet, Freiermuth. I really don't want any of you. I'm going to take Freiermuth. I'll explain my decision in a second. Coming back on that Austin Eckler take, Austin Eckler is a pass catcher, and Anthony Lynn is the run game coordinator. Brian Robinson's pretty pedestrian. He's not a guy we're really excited about. He went in the 9th round, and Eckler went at the 9-10 turn. So he's going about 12 picks later, not even, about 8 picks later. I don't really want either one on my team, but if I'm going to take a shot, I'd actually rather have Eckler in redraft. I don't want him in Dynasty. He's 29 years old. The ship has sailed. He did not look good last year, but the pass catching upside for Eckler is there. And I'm betting on Anthony Lynn because how much he loved Eckler when he was with the Chargers, and he drafted Austin Eckler. So to me, there's that relationship. Like I said, Brian Robinson's not a guy that has solidified the job that he can't be beaten out for the number 1 running back spot. So it wouldn't shock me, even with a healthy Brian Robinson, to see this backfield become a timeshare and to see Eckler get more of the goal line work. And ultimately, I think with Jaden Daniels being able to run, I think that's actually going to help Eckler, because it's now an additional threat defenses have to plan for. So I took Pat Freiermuth. I didn't have a tight end. I'll explain my decision why. Dallas Goedert was on the board. Dalton Schultz was on the board. Cole Kmet was on the board. Goedert, to me, is a player that I just don't see a lot of opportunity coming for this season with the addition of Saquon Barkley, plus A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are there. And obviously Jalen Hurts can, regardless of Jason Kelsey, can score rushing touchdowns, tush push or not. It's very crowded in Houston. So even though I think Schultz is probably the better player, he's way down the pecking order as, the pass catching option 4 from the receivers. And then obviously Mixon catches passes. So I wasn't super excited about that. As of today, Brandon Ayuk is a 49er, and he is not a Pittsburgh Steeler yet. I think that's probably what we all anticipate. But outside of George Pickens, Roman Wilson's injured right now, so there's really not a great option at wide receiver 2. I think Pat Freiermuth's going to be fine. Arthur Smith's crazy. Like, we have no idea what he's going to call. He's as likely to, this is a guy that took Bijan off the field and put Tyler Algier on last year. So I do think Pat Freiermuth actually has some upside if you're really, really punting like I did tight end. And look, if you're in the 9th, 10th round and you're trying to find upside, Jake Ferguson at the 807, he's the wide receiver 2 in Dallas. To me, that's a fantastic pick. And I'll put Pat Freiermuth not in the same talent level, not in the same tier. There is a tier break there. but I'm looking for guys that have a path to relevance. And so that's why I took Freiermuth. Look, if I get 7 points out of him a week, it's probably what that's fine. I'm not getting a ceiling performance like I would get with Mark Andrews or Kelsey or, some of the bigger tight ends. So late round, I'm okay with it. And we'll keep going here. As we get around deeper into the draft, we've got some QB2 starting to get selected. So Caleb Williams here being selected to back up Patrick Mahomes. I'm excited for Caleb Williams. Obviously, if you took him at the 101 in Superflex Dynasty, you're probably to the moon, given the fact that he's got a DJ Moore with a huge contract. He's got Rome Odunze. He's got Keenan Allen, at least for this season, with just one of the oldest, best pros you can possibly have to be a safety security blanket for him. Jaden Daniels going to back up Anthony Richardson to Zach's back at the 101. So I like that pick as well. Lots of rushing upside. Jared Goff. Wow, Jared Goff in the 11th. What a great pick for Mr. Freeman. Jared Goff to me is a player who, similar to Matt Stafford, is just being ignored. Obviously, Jared Goff has a much higher ceiling, I believe, with that offense than Stafford does. But Jared Goff is one of those players in the 11th round, 10th round. If I can get him as my QB1, I'm comfortable with that. I'd obviously rather have higher ceiling, from a rushing upside. But I think Jared Goff should safely slot into the top 12. And if you're in 10-team leagues, I think he should still finish as a QB1 inside the top 10 again this year, given the weapons that he has on that offense. So Tua coming off the board here to back up CJ Stroud. It's not best ball, but I am starting to kind of scan the board a little bit, looking for some stacks. I want to see if there's some guys that are trying to get at least some correlation. We know Vanilla Killa has Josh Allen with Kincaid, so that's a nice stack there. I don't see a receiver to complement it. Not a big deal. CJ Stroud, there we go, with Tank Dell, so a good little mini correlation. Trevor Lawrence with Christian Kirk, yep. So and Evan Ingram, so there's a little Jaguar stack there for Mike. So looking around the board, just kind of seeing what else we have. Guys that are watching, jump in the chat, throw some comments, throw some questions in there to interact a little bit. Normally I have my group of co-hosts with me. I don't tonight, and no stress, but I'm back on the clock here. I have Jahmyr Gibbs, Raheem Mostert, Jalen Warren, and Javonte Williams as my running back core. Marvin Harrison, Waddle, Pittman, and Rice as my receivers. So I'm probably looking at taking my backup quarterback or seeing if there's a second wide receiver I like. I'm going to go ahead and grab Khalil Shakir. He actually led from week 14. I have to fact check myself. But from week 13 or 14 on last year, he was the wide receiver 1 for Buffalo, and they still had Steph Diggs and they still had Gabe Davis. So he is the, on paper, wide receiver 3 in that offense behind Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman. But don't sleep on Khalil Shakir. I do think he is a solid pickup late in the redraft. I mean, getting anybody in the 11th round who's a starter on their team, a Josh Allen offense, you're not going to be upset by that. So, Mike, I'm excited for the Jags this year. Just spread the ball around, not focus on getting one wide receiver going. Yeah. I mean, I understand the logic. I think if in that specific scenario, then I'm probably looking at just drafting Trevor Lawrence. Ultimately, do I have anybody? No, I don't do that. I think if you're going to do that, Mike, then Trevor Lawrence is the guy you want to own. And I'll make this comparison. I've said this on my show before. I'll say it again. If I'm targeting a player like that, Jordan Love to me is the player that I'm targeting, where I don't really want a lot of pieces of the Green Bay offense in redraft. In Dynasty, yes, I do. In best ball, absolutely. Give me just about any of the receivers with Jordan Love as my correlation. But if you're going to have a guy who's got that many weapons, take the quarterback, right? Take the guy who's going to touch the ball every single play. So Jordan Love obviously has a much higher ceiling than Trevor Lawrence, but better team, better offense. But again, if you go, deep into the depth chart, I don't really want to be making sit-to-start decisions every single week on some of these ambiguous wide receiver and ambiguous running back rooms. So speaking of ambiguous running back rooms, I just took Ty Chandler at the 1203. I think Ty Chandler is going to finish the year as the RB1 in Minnesota. Aaron Jones has only ever played 2 full seasons in his entire career. One was his rookie year, and the second I don't remember off the top of my head, but I was just doing some stat checking the other day, so that's why I remember that off the top of my head. Ty Chandler beat Alexander Madison out of the job last year. I don't think Aaron Jones will stay healthy. I don't think anyone thinks he'll stay healthy. And Ty Chandler showed that he can be solid. So I certainly don't want him as my starter in either of my two running back spots, but to go and get him as my RB5, we know the running back position is historically one of the most injured positions in the game. You're going to need depth throughout the season. You're going to have bye weeks. You're going to have injuries. You're going to need some spot starts. So what I'm looking for these backup players is, can I see a clear path to playing time? Do I see some touchdown upside? Is there some actual relevance? And so that's what I'm looking for from a Zach Charbonnet, from a Ty Chandler, from a guy who's Trey Benson, but he's obviously we're really excited about that player, Blake Corum. Those are guys that I'm looking at where it's a clear path, and you obviously know that there's an opportunity there for touchdowns, and obviously that's really what we're chasing here. So let's get back a little bit as we get into the second half of the draft here. Looking at a couple more stacks. Zach back here, starting with Richardson to pair with A.D. Mitchell. So I love that stack. Josh Downs, unfortunately, the news today is that he was in a walking boot, probably out for 3 to 4 weeks. It's now looking like week 1 could be in doubt for him. He was listed as a starter on the team. So opportunities for Alex Pierce and A.D. Mitchell. We expect Mitchell would most likely fill the Josh Downs role alongside Michael Pittman. So yeah, I think that's a really solid pickup there. And there is Josh Downs in the 12-11. Ricky Pearsall being picked at the 13-2. I think the window for Ricky Pearsall to buy low is probably closed. It was probably closed a couple weeks ago when the trade rumors started circling around Brandon Ayuk. I think if you are really into Pearsall and Dynasty, you got to go get him before the weekend. I think we'll hear Brandon Ayuk news probably before the weekend is over. If it's Pittsburgh, if it's Cleveland has been mentioned, if it's somewhere else. Pearsall's hurt right now, so maybe you can talk that owner into getting rid of a rookie cheaper than he wants to. I doubt it. But I do think that your Pearsall window is probably pretty close to closed. Very nice. Luke Musgrave, fantastic. Luke, I talked about don't take a bunch of guys in ambiguous situations. I just took Luke Musgrave in Green Bay. I took him as my backup tight end. He's better than the other guys on the board, plain and simple. So obviously he's like pass catching 7 in that team. But I think for a backup tight end to fill in Pat Freiermuth, I punted tight end in this draft, so I'm okay with that. Love to know if anyone has thoughts or a hot take on Jaleel McLaughlin. It's really interesting. I'm going to take Matt Stafford here. I talked about him earlier. He's being slept on. I think the Rams defense is poor, and they're going to have to throw a ton, and we love their offensive weapons. We love their wide receivers. If anyone has a hot take on Jaleel McLaughlin, throw it in the chat. I'd love to know. Jaleel McLaughlin is relevant. I think he's going to be the RB2 there. It's certainly Sean Payton could have more of a timeshare than we want. Javonte is going to be in year 2 off of the ACL injury. Historically, Breece Hall kind of broke the mold last year, but historically that is the better season statistically for players that have the ACL, is that second year recovered after the surgery. So yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think on Jaleel McLaughlin. I'm not in or out. I'm just kind of mid on him right now. I'll be honest, I haven't taken a ton of shares of him in best ball. I haven't taken a ton of shares of the Broncos at all in best ball. It's one of the teams I'm trying to avoid. I don't think they're going to be a very high-scoring offense this season. But obviously, this is mostly a dynasty show, so I'd love to know someone's take on Jaleel McLaughlin in dynasty. Would you trade for him? Would you trade him away? And what kind of compensation would you be expecting? There goes Malachi Corley, exciting player in New York. Obviously, we don't really know who the wide receiver 2 there is because Mike Williams is just activated today off the PUP. So it is very possible that Corley could start the season alongside Garrett Wilson. But Mike Williams will do what Mike Williams always does, in my opinion, is he'll have 3 or 4 monster games this year, and then he'll probably sit on the sideline in the blue tent for the rest of it. So Malachi Corley, great late round flyer. The good piece there, Rose Mitchell. If Corley sucks after the first 2 weeks, drop him and pick up the hot waiver wire guy. It's a pretty easy. That's what I'm looking for in these late rounds, is we're looking for guys that you can easily make a decision on and you don't have to keep and clog a roster spot. Is this guy going to be good? Is this guy going to have relevant playing time? Is he going to have some upside and some ceiling? Yes, keep him. If he's not, cut him. right? This isn't dynasty where you're worried about what's he going to be in year 2, year 3. It's not best ball where you're not, you got to set a lineup. So I think that's what we're looking at. So some of the guys here in the late rounds, round 13, Jahan Dotson, same team for Rose Mitchell, great flyer of a pick. Dontavian Wicks right next to him is kind of the darling right now of the sleeper breakout pool. Interesting to see Tez Walker going this early. I don't normally see him get drafted this early, but I do think Tez Walker is another kind of, excuse me, interesting piece in Baltimore there next to Zay Flowers to profile as the wide receiver 2. What you believe about Rashad Bateman should determine what you believe about Tez Walker. I think they're inverse relationship. I'm not in on Bateman, so I am in on Walker. I do think he'll overtake Bateman this season, probably late on in the season. And obviously Zay Flowers is, the wide receiver one, even if he's the pass catching number 2 option on that team. So DeMario Douglas, really interesting player. Obviously Javon Baker, Jalen Polk, and then 17,000 other receivers in New England. I think if you're taking a late round flyer, Douglas or Polk are the 2 that I would probably take a shot on in that offense, because we just don't know what it's going to look like. We just don't know who's going to be involved there. And so I think taking a shot on any of those guys is completely fine. I thought Darnell Mooney just got hurt. I have to take a look at that the other day. I thought Mooney had something happen with him. I just took Roschon Johnson. Tim Tebow. Nice pack. I love it. Tim Tebow. I didn't even know he was. So that means Tom Brady's probably in there somewhere as well. Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert are really interesting to me. I think if you are looking for a late round running back, you can take either. I think Khalil Herbert's going to get traded. I think that's what will happen this season. Roschon Johnson obviously is on a rookie deal. They've already paid Swift. So to me, the Bears, if everyone's healthy, if the Bears are, I don't think they can win the division. I really don't think they can finish second. I think the Lions and the Packers are going to battle it out in that division this season. But that NFC North is quickly becoming the best division in football. If the Vikings can get a solid running back in there and the quarterbacks develop with the quarterback, McCarthy develops the way that I think the Vikings are hoping he will, with their offensive pieces, that should be a really fun offense over the next couple of years. And then the Bears with Caleb and Rome. I'm not a huge DeAndre Swift guy, but I do think if they can figure out kind of a committee running back with their wide receiving core and Caleb Williams, man, that the NFC North should have some shootouts in it. Should have some really good games. But coming back on my point really quickly, Roschon Johnson, I do think is going to be the RB2 there this season. And I think Khalil Herbert's a guy that could wind up playing for the Cowboys. He could wind up playing for, probably 3 or 4 other teams that, as injuries happen, need a running back. It looks like Braylon Allen's the guy in New York right now, but if he isn't, is Khalil Herbert one of the guys that ends up in New York behind Breece Hall? That's a possibility. Does he go to the Giants? They've got Motor Singletary. After that, it's, rookie. I think Tyrone Tracy was a 5th round pick. So, it's not high percentage chance that he hits. But I do think that Khalil Herbert is still a good player to have on your roster because I think he's going to have relevance because he's still a good football player. And again, it's the Hall of Fame game. Don't put a lot of stock into it. It was backups against backups. But he did what a fringe starter should have done against backups, and he dominated that game. And that's exactly what I'm looking for in a guy that I think is going to play is, are you clearly the best player on the field against backups who are fighting for roster spots? And the answer to that question from what I watched before the weather delay was yes. So Ralphie, middle of the second has been the most difficult decisions for me. I really don't love the guys there, but don't want to reach for DJ Moore in the second. I think it's a really good point. If you guys listen or watch my main show, my buddy Kendall's on there a ton. I've got a couple other hosts or co-hosts, guest hosts, however you want to call it, that come on a lot as well. And I kind of asked this question, and if you guys are following along, throw your answer in the chat. Where is the wide receiver tier break for you? Where's the running back tier break for you? And I ask that because, and when I say that, after what players, right? So like for me, I already answered it early on. After AJ Brown goes, that's the tier break for me. That's where I'm looking for Gibbs, Taylor, one of the big time running backs. But Rafi makes a really good point because this second round, it kind of feels like the same player and one giant tier of guys. And I don't really have a problem with somebody who wants to nitpick Drake London, Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk, Devonta Smith, DJ Moore, Cooper, like all those guys feel very similar range of outcome wise to me. Yes, you can make the case Chris Olave is the one and has no competition. DJ Moore's in a crowded, in a crowded room. But to me, that's just nitpicking. And I get that's what we do as fantasy managers. We constantly overthink. We wouldn't have fun with this if we didn't. But ultimately, I think there is a huge tier of kind of similar guys. So if you're in here, throw it in the chat. We'd love to know what you guys think as well. Want to go through a couple more minutes and just take a look now that the draft is wrapped up. I want to look at the board, just kind of give you my thoughts on a couple different teams that stand out. So give me a minute to just kind of peruse here, see if there's someone that really catches my eye and see what I like. I want to talk about Vanilla Killa's team really quickly because I was really curious to see, starting with his first, it's a 3 wide receiver set. So he started Bijan and Achane, and then he went onesie with Allen and Kincaid, obviously to get the stack. I wanted to see what his wide receiver room would look like, and it turned out pretty well. T. Higgins, obviously in a solid offense as the 2, assuming Jamar Chase is healthy and good to go, and we'll see what happens with contracts. Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, JSN, Xavier Legette, Dontavian Wicks, and Jermaine Burton. So look, he doesn't have ceiling wide receivers, and that's okay when he starts with the 4 guys that he started with. But I think his wide receiver room turned out well. And then obviously to throw Jalen Wright, Spears, and Tyrone Tracy to back up Bijan and Achane, who should be your every week starters. Achane, of course, has a little injury history, but any player can get injured on any play. So I don't always worry too much about that. But yeah, I like the way his team turned out from a build perspective because I was worried, man, what are those wide receivers going to look like? And then I want to take a look here at Mr. Freeman's team because he started with 5 straight receivers: CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, Debo, George Pickens, and Amari Cooper. So his running back room, he was able to piece together Tony Pollard, Zamir White, Devin Singletary, and Ray Davis. It's a thin build. I don't expect – look, Singletary is the starter in New York. I just don't have faith that they're going to be anything other than a bottom 10 offense. I know you guys, like me, probably have a lot of shares of Malik Neighbors in your dynasty leagues. We're excited about him. He's still a quarterback away from being what we believe he can be. And Singletary to me you've seen Hard Knocks. You watched it. It's a massive downgrade from Saquon Barkley. So Saquon Barkley has struggled in that offense, hitting 1,000 yards and getting double-digit touchdowns. I don't see a world where Singletary does it. So I love Mr. Freeman's wide receiver core, but when you start that early, it's hard. I maybe would have passed on Amari Cooper to take a shot on Kenneth Walker, James Cook, Mixon, White, that group of running backs, because those guys obviously went after. Tony Pollard to me is scary because of the timeshare. I actually think Tajay Spears is going to be the running back to own in Tennessee. My simple advice is stay away. Just try not to take any of those guys in those ambiguous situations if you don't have to. If you have to, I would rather take Spears. Let's see. Yeah, Spears went 3 rounds later. And I think that they like him. So he's listed as a co-starter as well. But yeah, let's look for some teams that obviously Kryptonaut was on auto, so we're not really going to jump in and take a good look at his group. But it's interesting because I like Zach Back's team. It's hard to draft at the 101 because obviously, 22 players go off the board every time you make a pick. But Christian McCaffrey, assuming health, obviously cleared shot to be the RB1. David Montgomery, to me, is the best backup running back in the NFL. He's obviously not a backup. He is a starter, and I do think they could put Gibbs and Monty on the field at the same time. It's really shocking that he's going in the 7th round. He should be going in the 5th. But CMC with Monty as your RB1 and 2 is great. Trey Benson, I think, is going to be fantastic. Braylon Allen. So I would have added another running back here, but Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell. So some solid receivers there. Ceiling performance with Anthony Richardson. And then obviously Kyle Pitts, everyone's excited about wanting to take that big leap. Another team that stood out to me that I really liked was Shred Gross's team. Starting with Amon-Ra, fantastic. You have a shot at the overall wide receiver 1. Chris Olave has yet to produce a wide receiver 1 season, but I do think that everyone does. It's in his range of outcomes. It's probably going to be a wide receiver 12 to 15 finish again for him this year with Derek Carr. Pacheco and Walker as your 2 running backs, really good. CJ Stroud to stack with Tank Dell. Christian Watson is the wild card. Ferg, I love it. I think that's a great late round tight end, especially given the upside and the opportunity for targets in that offense. If my memory's right, he had 100, and I'll look it up. It's right in front of me. I think he had 110 or 120 targets last season. Brandon had 102 targets last season, dyslexia. Brandon Cooks had 80 something. So to me, Ferguson is the second option there. I'm passing on Hawkinson there. I would have taken Chase Brown. I wouldn't take Chubb, but Corum, one of these other guys that I think are going to have more relevance at the RB2 spots. Probably the only pick in his team I don't like. Zeke, we'll see what comes to fruition. But then Tua, Mike Williams, Rico Dowdle, Thielen, and Elijah Mitchell. So top half the roster, really good. I think that's a team that, if this was a real league, has legitimate shot to make the playoffs. And then another team I really like as well. Rafi always does a really good job drafting. Rafi 69 bomb, but Breece Hall, ceiling performance. James Conner is RB2, and then some shots, but shots that I think we like with Chase Brown, who was listed as the starter until last week. Jerome Ford, who's going to start the year in Cleveland, and I think is going to be relevant even when Chubb comes back. Marshawn Lloyd, who I'm very high on in Dynasty. I'm not sure what his redraft outlook is, but for your running back 5 in the 13th round, absolutely. And then Kamani Vidal, why not? J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, they're old, they're banged up. Vidal could be a second half of the year. Probably not league winner, but could have some relevance. And then Michael Wilson in the 15th round. So really, really great team. Your onesies, Dak Prescott and Mark Andrews. I think that also is a playoff team as well. So that's it for me, guys. I'm going to be doing more of these on Wednesdays. So if you're looking to do a mock, obviously stay connected. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel on the Extra Point on YouTube. And then, as always, I will be live on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. When the season starts, I'm going to go to 4 p.m. and go for an hour and then cut it off because we all want to watch Thursday night football. So once the season starts, I'll move the show up a couple of hours. But tomorrow night, we are going to be going through the redraft do not draft list. So tune into tomorrow's show if you're looking for, Kendall will be with me tomorrow. My buddy Mike, both from Get Right Fantasy Network, will be on as well as my guests. All three of them have been given the show doc by me to add in the players that they want to talk about. So we're going to go through all 4 of the positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, 3 guys each. So we're going to go through about 36 players tomorrow night for the do not draft list. And you guys can decide, what you want to do with that. And then next week, we'll go the opposite way, and we'll talk about some league winners as we build into the season that is quickly approaching. So again, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube to my channel, The Extra Point. You can also listen along on Patreon and Spotify. Follow along on Instagram at _extra_point_FFB. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Extra Point, and hope you guys enjoyed the mock draft.